Hey everyone, this is Zephyr with another video in our Foundry Basics series. This video we're going to focus on tiles, starting with the tools on the left and our tile configuration. We'll also go through overhead tiles and all the different occlusion modes from none to roof. We'll take a look at animated tiles and how tiles interact with each other on the scene. Whether you are a brand new user for Foundry or an old hand, this video is intended to be a reference, so please check the timestamps for the sections most relevant for you as you're prepping your sessions. Now let's begin with the tools. The Tiles tool is on the left side bank and looks like a stack of blocks. Our first tool is Select, then we have Place Tile, Tile Browser, and Foreground Layer, which is a toggle. Starting with Place Tile, this is almost like drawing a tile. You'll click and drag to create a box that you can then fill with the tile image or video of your choice, and we can see the coordinates, z-index, etc. Going into our images, we can select from either our core data, which is included in Foundry, or our user data. Within user data, I have assets that I've already included, such as this Elder Demon folder and this Tyrannosaurus Rex folder. When browsing images in Foundry, there's a few different options. List view displays the names of all of the files. Thumbnail view shows an icon and the name. Tile shows the entire image. And then image shows a much blown up version of the image. I prefer the tile view myself or thumbnail, so I can see the names while also looking at the images. And I can select any of these different options. And when I select this Elder Demon Fire, I have to update the tile for the image to actually get passed. You'll notice that the size of the tile is identical to what I drew the box as. And this isn't really ideal for this shape of this tile. And I can swap out these images and they're all going to still have that kind of squished look to them because it's not the right aspect ratio. We'll go over how to deal with that in the future, but I wanted to show you how the draw tiles works. Draw tile is mostly useful for using something like a background texture or something like that you don't necessarily need the aspect ratio to be maintained. I'm going into the Bailiwiki Premium Towns module and grabbing a roof, and we'll use that for a lot of these examples moving forward. Here, when I have the tile configuration open, I can change the coordinate. If I increase the x-axis, it's going to shift further to the right. If I increase the y-coordinate, it will shift further down, as you can see from updating the tile. So the 0 point is in the top leftmost position of the scene. I can then alter the width and height to whatever I want. So if I need a very specific width in pixels, I can accomplish that there. Same thing goes for the height. And we can click and drag this around. Then I can set my rotation. You can either manually do this, or by clicking on it, you can hold Control and scroll wheel. I can adjust the tile opacity to make it transparent or opaque, and I can select a tint to it. We'll go over the possibilities for tint a little more later. We can also use this little orange node at the bottom to resize the tile. And note that if you've rotated a tile, the preview as you're manipulating the image is going to show as if it was not rotated. So it's a little hard to get an idea of exactly what the tile is going to look like when you're doing that. I'm going to clear this out, and now we're going to look at the tile browser. This, when I go through and look at my user data, it's going to start me with the image. And the important thing here is the asset grid size. This is going to determine the size of the tile you bring in. You'll notice when I bring in this roof, it's a nice square shape. So it's got the right aspect ratio, no matter what my asset grid size is. And once I've brought the tile in, it functions identically to tiles that were drawn with the Place Tile tool. And I can bring in additional. By changing the asset grid size, I'm going to change the size of this. A higher number indicates a higher density of pixels per inch, so will result in a smaller tile, whereas a lower value will result in a much larger tile. And again, these all can be manipulated in the same way as the other tiles. And again, we can resize using this little drag node down at the bottom. and we can use Control-Z to undo any actions we made that we don't like. And we can squish this tile around, which is useful for making sure that things fit certain aesthetics we want. You'll also notice that as we drag this around, because this has the tile browser feature to it, it actually kind of locks this drag adjustment to a specific half grid or full grid unit. If you hold Shift as you're finishing that move and releasing the left click, you can then set it to any size that you want, rather than locking it in to those specific increments. I'm going to use the original 100 DPI tile here, as I know that's the standard, and we're going to get into overhead. If we click this toggle within the tile configuration and update the tile, we'll notice that it fades out. That's because we're only working with the background right now. If I click on the foreground layer toggle, we'll notice that there's a slight purple aura, and that will make the foreground tiles or overhead tiles fully opaque and visible. Now that I have the foreground tile, there's a few different ways that this can occlude or disappear. If I drag in a test actor here, we'll see that because this tile is on fade, as soon as my token gets underneath this tile, the tile disappears. By double-clicking on the tile and going back to the overhead section, I can change the occlusion alpha to control the transparency of the tile when it fades. Notice that this higher number of 0.35 will cause the tile to still fade, but still be visible above my token. There are different modes here. If I change from fade to radial and update my tile, then when my token goes underneath it, only a small area around the token is going to fade with the token. This is useful if you want something that gives a claustrophobic feeling, like a bunch of spider webs that you can only see so far in. Next, we have a really powerful version, which is the roof mode. Notice that I've created a very simple building with lights and walls. And this tile is set to fade right now. You can see it entirely disappears. But then as I move around, we'll see that there's this section where the window is, that the tile appears light, and you have these strange sight rays going through, but not seeing underneath the tile. How we can fix that is by turning this overhead tile into a roof tile. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to treat all of the walls beneath the roof as if they are fully opaque. And we'll see that as we come back around to the same spot, we don't have that weird sight ray going into the building. So this is useful for creating roofs. The last mode for overhead tiles is none. This is going to cause the tile to stay always up and not disappear no matter what token is beneath it. A practical application of this is this room from the modular castle. Notice that as this character moves next to the walls, there are shadows over it. And beneath this stained glass, this character is tinted with the colors of the stained glass. It's not a perfect representation because of how windows work, but you can still see that these tiles are displaying over top of the token, creating an immersive feel. And I've constructed this room is I've made the stained glass have the occlusion mode of none. Then I've lowered the opacity a bit so that it gives the color on the tokens. And I can configure that opacity until it's something that looks saturated enough for me, but then keeps the visibility good for players. And for the walls, I've done the same thing with none for the occlusion mode, but left the opacity at 1. That way they just never disappear. The idea is that tokens are only ever going to be underneath the shadowy areas. And I've constructed this room by having the tiles for the walls and the tiles for the room as separate entities. That way I can have different behavior for both. Next, let's go back to tinting. This is on the basic configuration for tiles, and you can select any color on this color picker to change the entire look of the tile to whatever you want. And you can either use the color picker, or you can use the hex code area to put in a specific hex code if you already know what you want. A practical application of this is in the Modular Towns module. It's within the Bailiwiki Premium Maps Towns under Maps, and then it is in Town Square, and it is in the Class 1 Modular section. We have a variety of roofs that are in a grayscale. So you can use a grayscale object as a really flexible tile. This way you don't have to have multiple tiles for every color. You can just use the grayscale and tint it to, say, red for one scene. And maybe the next scene you use blue, or you can have multiple of these roofs in the same scene, each with different colors, to use variety with a single tile. Now looking at animated tiles, we have this great animated heart from the Gorgon that's in the Modular Castle series. The animation section of tiles controls whether a video loops, autoplays, and if it does have video volume baked into it, it will actually play the sound. And we can see that if I don't have loop on, once this animation concludes, it stops in that position. But if I leave loop on, it is going to continue to play the animation indefinitely. If I turn off autoplay, it's effectively going to pause the animation. Right-clicking the tile will allow me to click the play button up here. You'll see that's replaced with a pause button that I can click to stop the animation again. And again, we can do all of the same treatments on an animated tile as we can any other tile. We can make it overhead, we can change the occlusion methods, etc. We already saw a little bit of the tile context menu, but here's where we can move tiles up and down, set them as overhead, or set them as underfoot. So the current mode between underfoot and overhead is highlighted in orange, and when I click on the other one, it will actually update the tile. Deselecting and reselecting will refresh the active mode, and you can switch between the two again. On the other side of the tile is another context menu. And we can see as I'm trying to move these other tiles around, sometimes I grab this template or this footprint when I don't want to. And I can use this toggle locked state on the right-hand context menu to prevent movement of this tile. It can still be selected, so it is not a perfect solution, and you probably want to save these large bottommost tiles for the very last thing that you do when building a scene, but locking tiles is an option that is there for you. Also in the context menu, we have the hidden state, or toggle visibility state. So this trap here, I don't want players to see. I can use this toggle visibility state to mark it as hidden, just like I can with tokens and other objects. And this way it will have a reduced opacity for me as the GM, so I still know where it is, but my players won't be able to see it. As we can see from a player perspective, they don't see any tile here, but the GM still can. Now let's look at tiles and how they interact on the map. As an example of how you might build out a scene using tiles, I'm just going to drag in some different tiled rooms. Again, these are all from the Modular Castle, so this is close to the use case of how we would assemble rooms with them. I'm just going to throw down a few different room options, and then I'll connect everything up with hallways and put a background. These exact rooms and whether they make sense isn't really important for this particular example. Now that I've got my rooms in place, I can rotate them and do anything I want to make the individual tiles look good and make sense. Then I'll go in and grab some hallway pieces to connect them up. You'll notice that each tile I drag in is going to display above all of the previously placed tiles. It's very easy to see when it's over the woodwork, etc. So keeping that in mind, I can then bring in these stairs or another hallway piece that I want to overlap my existing hallway, and it will always be above that hallway, assuming I've not done anything to mess with that original hallway piece's height. We can see that again here if I move this office down a little bit to make sure it intersects with the hallway in kind of a strange way. If I bring in another tile piece, again, it's going to be above the office. So how would I deal with that? Because inevitably I'm going to have some weird connections where hallways would overlap. Well, I can use this bring to front option, and that will put the office on a higher Z value than the hallway. And this way, the office is going to be above that, and it will also be above any additional tiles that I bring in. If, for example, I grab a template and I drop in a castle footprint here, if I drag in this big white castle footprint, we'll notice that the office is above it, but all the other tiles are below it because we've not manipulated those other tiles' Z values. They're still going to be just below this most recently placed tile. So to fix this, we can use the tile context menu on the left and send this footprint to back. And this is going to make it underneath all of these other tiles. This will also work if we go into the tile browser and we bring in any new tiles. They are going to come in at that same initial Z value that all the other tiles did, and therefore are going to be above the template. We can also grab the foreground layer toggle, and that way when we drag things in, they're going to already be overhead tiles. This is important to keep track of because you don't want to be placing hallways as foreground and your walls as background. And again, we'll notice that if we have that toggle off, that the foreground walls are going to disappear. And I can select this and make sure that it's always visible. And then we have this nice opaque wall that looks like it's a part of the map, but provides that nice shadow over tokens as they go over the edges of the walls. To better understand how Z values work, let's take a look at the console. I'm going to select a tile here and then open my console with F12. And from here, we're going to take a look at the data for the tile. I'm going to use the command canvas.background._controlled, and that's going to be my controlled tile. And we can see a little preview in gray. And once I hit enter, then it will gain opacity. And I can expand this, and there's a lot of information here. But what we're looking at is the Z index. We'll see that that is 100. That determines where the tile appears up and down in the scene, what tiles it appears over, whether it's above the background, etc. Then if we do canvas.background.tiles, we'll get the list of all 8 tiles that are background tiles within the scene. I can then expand out all of these individual tiles and look at their data one by one. Tile 0 is going to be the most recently added tile, while the highest number is going to be the oldest. So tile 0 is going to be this footprint that I did, and we'll see the Z index is 99, so it's going to appear below these other tiles. Where things get interesting is if I look at tile number 1 here, we'll see that the Z index is 100, just like the tile we just looked at. Going into 2 and many of the others, their Z index is also 100. So every tile that you bring into the foreground or the background is going to start at the same Z level. Despite the fact that the most recent one is going to be slightly above, you can kind of think of that as 0.1. And the Z index 101 is for the office, so that is above all of the others. Again, because these tiles are going to appear over each other in order of whatever the most recent tile is taking precedence, you can think of them coming in at Z index 100.x, where x is the highest value of that Z index so far. So for example, the first tile would be Z 100.0, etc. Similarly, if I bring in tiles and I increase their Z index by using bring to front or send to back, then that is going to update their Z value to be 1 greater than whatever the current highest Z value is, or lowest in the case of send to back. So I've just brought in this new tile and sent it to front. And if I do canvas.background.controlled again, and I look at this tile's Z value, we should see that it will be 102. And if we expand this out, yes, it is 102, so it will always appear above that office. So again, it's always going to augment whatever the highest value on the scene is by 1. You can adjust this by increasing the Z index of that initial tile by having it sent to front, and that will go to 103. And even if we were to delete the tile that is at 101 and bring in a new one, because there's still a tile with Z value 102, any new tiles that are brought to the front are going to have a Z value 1 higher than the highest current tile. And we can see that even though 101 is gone, we're not going to go back to 101, we are at 103. So that's important to keep in mind as you order your tiles that you bring in so that things lay nicely. Note that foreground tiles and background tiles are separate. So if you are referencing or manipulating this data in any way with macros, you're going to have to call the correct type of tiles. All of the tiles that we've looked at in the console so far were background tiles. And so they were accessed via canvas.background.tiles or canvas.background._controlled. To access our foreground tile, that is the walls tile, we're going to have to use canvas.foreground. This is really important, again, if you are using macros or anything else to manipulate that, or if you want to find the specific value for a foreground tile versus a background tile. So again, just instead of background, we'll use foreground. And there's only one foreground tile in here, and that is going to be our walls. And we can move that around and look at the data as much as we want here, providing we call it correctly, and that z-index is 100, even though it is a foreground tile. They are separate from background tiles. Next, a minor note on how to select and move tiles around. The tile with the highest z value is always going to be selected first. This includes that kind of silent decimal point in z values. So even though I've not brought this chair to the top of the stack of tiles, I will always select it over these stairs that I put down before the chair. Also, when placing tiles and moving them around, you'll notice that if you're on a grid, they move in either full or half grid increments. But if you don't want them to be on a half grid increment, for example, this chair being kind of cut off by the walls, you can hold down Shift as you are releasing the tile, just like we did earlier with the resizing. And this will allow you to precisely position the tile so that the chair is not under the wall. And I can do that again with the stairs. And using Shift is not the most precise method in the world. You don't have really fine control. So it can be difficult to line things up exactly how you want them. So be patient with yourself as you are using Shift and doing these freehand positioning. And now that we have that all nice and pretty, again, you also always have the option of resizing tiles once you've placed them to make them fit your scenes. And once more, because these stairs are rotated, the preview is going to be as if this object has not been rotated at all. And I can still place it to kind of give a little bit more bulk to these stairs and make it seem like there's a little bit more of a platform for this throne. Okay. And we have a nice looking tile, and I can again adjust the width or the height if I want to get it back to the original or if I want to change the dimensions at all. Now let's talk about getting rid of tiles. We've placed our tiles, but we've decided that we don't want them on this scene at all. You can either select tiles individually and delete them, or if you want to get rid of all of them, you can use Control A. This is the same with tokens as well. Use Control A, you will select all of the tiles that you have on that layer in that scene. So here I have used Control A, but we'll notice that it does not select the background tiles because I'm working in the foreground layer. But if I turn that off and use Control A, I can delete all of my background tiles. There are some modules that will add a tool to be able to clear all of the tiles from a scene in case you need to restart, or you're only using tiles for special effects in a fight. This concludes our tutorial on tiles in basic Foundry VTT. This does not cover things that are added by modules, such as better roofs, levels, or Monk's active tile triggers. We do have a few different video tutorials on those great modules, and you can find those in the cards on screen now. I hope that whether you are brand new to Foundry or a returning user, that this video has either refreshed your memory on some aspects of tiles or taught you something completely new. If there's anything that you think I may have left out or any lingering questions you may have, please let me know down in the comments below. Also tell me what other topics that you would like to see covered in this Foundry Basics series. This has been Zephyr. Thanks again for watching, and have a good one.